Hello, spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scary-ish Podcast.
Woo!
I'm Robin Grace, and this is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
And we're here to talk about some cool, scary-ish topics.
Indeed we are. I am super excited because this week was Patreon week, so we let our patrons pick our topics, and that's a lot of P's, lots of popping sounds, so hoping those don't get too bad. But yeah, very, very excited about that. But yeah, we put up several different topics. The patrons decided, so we're going to be covering a couple of things that were chosen for us. So if you want to basically tell us what to do, you can go over to patreon.com/scarishpodcast and sign up.
For our Choose Your Adventure tier. It's an actual tier.
Choose your own adventure tier. Exactly. I think that's $3 a month, so you get early access to everything, which is the $1 level, plus the ability to tell us what to do, basically. So pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited for this episode. I do want to say that we do the Storytime episodes every Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and you can watch those recorded live at Scarish, nope, not that, youtube.com/Scarish and twitch.tv/Scarish podcast. Maybe I'll try and get a plugin on there that actually lets us broadcast at Scarish.com. That'd be really cool to do, actually, but you can come and watch and listen to the stories and respond to us while we're reading them and let us know what you think. It's a really good time, and if you don't have time, you can't make it at that time, those episodes release every Friday, which is like 4 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you have a scary story, a ghost story, Robin does this way better than I do. Robin, what kind of stories are we looking for?
Our homegrown horrors that we love to get from you are paranormal, supernatural, spiritual. We have sleep paralysis stories, night terrors,
coincidental stories,
which
are always really funny.
Just strange incidences that have happened to you from you, your family, your friends. Ask your parents, your grandparents, your cousins.
Ask your kids, ask your wives, ask your husbands, ask everyone up in here. But send those stories to us. You can email storytime@scarish.com. You can also go to our website, scarish.com, and click on Contact Us. Facebook.com/ScarishPodcast. You can message us. You can tweet us at ScarishPod. You can Instagram us at ScarishPodcast. So we hope to hear from you folks because we have some great stories that we always get, and it's always super exciting to hear from you. But this episode is us talking to you about stuff that we research. And I think we decided that I was going to go first this episode. Am I not crazy about that one?
Yeah, you go, Ger.
Okay. So this week, like Robin probably brought up, but actually didn't, I want to bring it up because my script is not accurate. We let the patrons decide. It's kind of funny because I tossed out 3 topics that I was thinking about doing, and Robin also put up 3 topics. I thought we were going to have like a poll for each of us so that people could decide my topic and people could decide your topic.
But they ended up picking one of yours and one of mine anyway.
Yeah, it worked out really well. They wound up picking it was just 6 things mashed together, and the top 2, the first one was one of Robin's and the second one was one of mine. So I'm going to be covering Atlantis, which is kind of exciting for me because it's like an exciting topic. There's a lot of research on it. There's so many debates going on for so very long on this topic. And I would like to point out that Atlantis, while fascinating and most likely not real, it's not very scary-ish. That said, it is a mythical continent that is said to have existed before sinking under the sea. And if that doesn't scream volcano or a natural disaster, I don't know what does. So
comet that came in and created a tidal wave.
I checked the record of impacts that have been discovered, and I can confirm that it was not a meteor or a comet if it is the actual time that it suggested it existed and disappeared, basically. But when we get to the end, we're going to go over what could have caused this to happen. And those do get kind of intense.
All right.
So that'll be kind of fun. But let's look at a few things when it comes to Atlantis. Like, first, let's look at where this started. And then we're going to look at where it actually could have been located.
I hear it's under the sea.
Oh, wow. That was a good joke. And then let's talk about what could have happened to make it just sink beneath the waves. Because I get really excited when it's like extinction level events or like catastrophes, stuff like that. And so first of all, I do want to put a big shout out there to someone who's really brought a lot of attention to this. So shout out to you, Jason Momoa. He brought us that brilliant documentary about Atlantis called Aquaman. I was truly in the dark about almost all that stuff till I saw that small budget indie flick.
You're so stupid.
I could not believe my eyes. I didn't know that it was all going on. But anyways, the origin of Atlantis is not exactly what most people think it is. It's certainly not what I thought it was. And in most cases, when I was doing research in a lot of these fan sites, and I call them fan sites because they're not like official history sites or like places where people have done like serious documentation and research. It starts off in the timeline of when Atlantis was supposed to be a place that resided above the waves, and it goes from there. So, and this time is roughly 9500 BC. That's supposed to be around the time where Atlantis went away. And the first writings place Atlantean activity and ultimate destruction around this time. Like, it really isn't debated about when it went away. It's always thought to be around this time period. So that said, there are actually no records whatsoever that exist today of a place called Atlantis being spoken about until a work called the Timaeus. And you can try and correct my pronunciation, but it's a Latin word or a Greek word. I don't remember which, and I'm pretty sure I got it right. And that was written by the philosopher known as Plato. So that said, let's unpack this shit.
Sounds like a plate of bullshit.
I hate you so much. Whenever I write my scripts, I'm always like, I wonder where Robin's going to toss in a really bad pun. And it's basically every sentence. I'm like, she can turn this into a bad pun. We could get like all pinky up in the air with this because we're going to be talking about Plato, and Plato was a philosopher.
I love playing with Plato.
I hate you so much. But man, I do love playing with Plato also. I miss Ryan because when we had our niece here, it was so much fun to play with all that kid stuff again. Like we just like roll out the Play-Doh and get out the cookie cutters. I don't know. Okay, let's not get too far off the trail here. So we're digging into this. We're not going to do this like a college lecture where we like talk all intelligently and occasionally stop to fart and then waft it to our noses and sniff deeply.
Because we are not historians. We're not scientists. We're just two people with a podcast that talk about stuff.
Exactly. And we're talking about what you told us to talk about this time. By the way, that's a South Park reference, the sniffing your own farts, if you're like a snobby person. But I'm going to put this in a way where we can kind of all understand it.
Wait, hold on. Side tangent. There's an episode of Friends where
they sniff their own farts?
Well, no. So Joey is an actor, obviously, in Friends. And he teaches an acting class. And he's like, it's called smell the fart acting. And so you got to make your face like you're smelling a fart. So you know what I mean? I don't know. There's an episode about that.
I'm so glad we had a Friends tangent just for that. I should have known that if I would have put in a South Park joke, it would eventually lead back to Friends, as all things do, or Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Anyways, we're going to put this in a way we all understand it, and basically, no one had ever heard of Atlantis until Plato wrote about this, and he wrote about this around like 350 BC. And at the time, Plato did what philosophers tended to do in this era, which is he wrote a piece of fiction that gave examples of things that hasn't actually happened or didn't actually occur to illustrate a point to people in that time period. Think of like, if you're putting it in terms of today, think of something like Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies. You know what I mean?
Have you read that book?
I have not, but I've read Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer, or Vampire Hunter, I forget what it's called. I love that book. That movie is terrible. It's nothing like the book. Imagine if someone found Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies like 2,000 years into the future, and people all of a sudden became like, did you know there was an actual zombie outbreak in England in 1812? Like, that's kind of what's going on here. So Plato wrote this thing that describes a conflict between Athens, which was a real place, and another nation that was incredibly advanced, had all this technology, and was like the pinnacle of like culture.
But it wasn't real.
And that was called Atlantis. And the thing is this is talking about an event that occurred 9,000 years before Plato. So 9,500. And that's where people get that time frame from.
Okay.
So there had been like no talk of Atlantis before this, and he states in this work of fiction, basically, like when you read Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, the beginning, like the prologue, is a guy who meets a vampire who tells him this story, you know? But because it's a prologue, people are like, oh, this isn't real. This is just like how this story came out. You know what I mean? It's part of the fiction. And in the fiction, it talks about how during the travels in Egypt, they found out about this place and this legend and what happened. And that doesn't mean it's real, but we're going to kind of work our way back to the whole Egypt thing. So he describes this conflict between Athens and Atlantis. Now, here's the thing about Atlantis. Everyone kind of knows where Athens is. You know, it's in Greece. If you don't know where Greece is, a lot of these locations, you're probably going to need to get
an atlas.
I wasn't going to say atlas. Get an atlas, get a globe, just Google it, go on Google Maps if you don't know where these locations are. But we're gonna go over the Mediterranean era. So Mediterranean area, I should say.
I was like, Mediterranean has an era?
It doesn't. It might. I don't know.
Oh, maybe.
So anyways.
We're not historians.
We're not historians. But Plato describes Atlantis, and he actually gives like dimensions and how big it was. And I'm not going to get too balls deep in this, but essentially he says that the plains, it's an island that has mountains on the rim and a large plain in the middle of it. Not like flying plain, but like flat land. And that plane was supposed to be around 230 by 345 miles. So if you add the mountains in, it's bigger. So let's just say 400 by 500 miles. That's how big this thing is. And that would be around the size of like Germany or like Wisconsin or Montana if they got a little bit fatter. So it's not this enormous continent, but it is quite large. And as a side note, in the work that's written, Plato states that the measurements and descriptions of the island came from the Egyptians. So he's crediting all of this knowledge to like a story he heard, an oral history he heard, quote unquote heard, because it's all part of the fiction, from the Egyptians. And Atlantis was basically the idea of a utopia. And it was literally an idea of utopia to the point where this story became an inspiration later on, not just for the idea of Atlantis, but the concept of utopia and the use like of the example of Atlantis. Like there's a work called like The First Utopia or something like that in the 1500s. And the guy was directly inspired by this work in particular. Because like Atlantis is this place where people like have supposedly perfected like everything. And I know some philosophy major out there right now is like, I don't think so. In fact, blah, 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 blah. Save it. I'm generalizing. I don't need the corrections. Everyone can Google this shit if they want to correct me. Don't send that, though. Don't at me. Atlantis gets too up its own ass about how great it is and decides, like, we're going to bring how awesome we are to other places. So it starts spreading war. And eventually it bumps up against Athens, and Athens wins when Athens should not have won. And the reason this was written is to kind of illustrate the idea of this like perfect advanced society would ultimately be defeated by a quote unquote state. Plato is all about the state. Again, take your pinky down. We're not going to do that. And you can look up what his idea of the state is. I'm going to generalize this because there's a ton to it. And we're just going to say that it's a place where everyone kind of has equal footing and equal opportunity versus like what the concept of this utopia was, which is where like everyone has their specific place that they have to stay in, and it's created this like quote unquote perfect society. So it's really like this idea of conflicting ideologies more than like this really awesome Michael Bay novel about like war and explosions and like alligators with people on it. So the story is basically like, oh, you think it would be awesome to live this way? Let me write a fictional story about why that would suck and how like the state would be sweet, and then there's going to be like advanced technology and lasers and shit, like pew pew pew. And then, like, also he tosses in there the place he's living right now is, like, Athens is #1. Like, just still, like, putting that in there about how great it is.
Right.
So it's like he gave a real place that he lived credit for a war that never happened, which is something that I could totally see today's politicians doing. So, anyways, after Atlantis lost the battle, the gods were like, boo, you suck. And they sunk that shit to the bottom of the sea. And that's the first time Atlantis appears, and the story of Atlantis appears with it. A couple of things we're going to jump into here. When people write stories, especially things that are an allegory, they tend to use shit that's happening at the time. And this was a story that was an allegory for things. And two things that were happening around this time are pretty cool. One in particular was that Athens itself tried to invade Sicily, and it failed. So the whole like oppression of your beliefs on another society that somehow pushes back when you consider yourself this advanced thing.
You know, they say write what you know.
Yeah, I mean, realistic. I was about to say I hate you, but then I was like, oh, wait, she made a great point. But that's totally true. It's like you're writing about stuff that's like contemporary, that just happened. And now it's all set in the past. It's all history. But at the time, this shit just happened. You know, Athens is still kind of reeling from it. The second thing is that there was this place called Helike. And I might be saying that wrong, but this is how I was told the pronunciation is by a bunch of places on the internet. So Helike was wiped off the face of the earth by a massive tsunami. Like, legitimately, it happened. They confirmed it through all the science stuff that they do. And here's the crazy thing about this place. It's theorized that an earthquake caused the tsunami that destroyed the city. And I think we can all believe that. We've all, like, bear witness to an earthquake happening in the ocean that led to a tsunami that wreaked all kinds of havoc.
Right.
Sometimes if they're closer to the mainland, the earthquake itself destroys stuff, and then a smaller tsunami comes in and causes all sorts more devastation, you know? And this is something we can all picture. And this actually existed. And what was funny when I was researching this, I was like, how do they know this actually existed if this happened so long ago? You know, like 2,500 years ago. It literally happened right around the time this stuff came out. So what's known about the aftermath of this from like just doing the studies of the area is that it was submerged by the tsunami for a significant amount of time. And that's the conclusion that happens at the end of Plato's story is a city being lost underneath the sea. And it's like when this came out, people that read this were probably just like, yep, that can happen. Remember he like? Hashtag never forget. Like,
oh my goodness.
It's something people were obviously going to remember and like relate to. So it really played on stuff from the recent history of the time. The other thing for those of you with the like I want to believe posters on your wall that are like, Adam, like you're not giving Atlantis a chance, is that this is a place that 100% confirms that a landmass can suddenly and inexplicably be submerged. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that a place like Atlantis could have existed at the time. And it eventually did have the water retreat, by the way. And what's super fascinating about this place is that August 23rd, 1817, this shit was 100% confirmed again because another earthquake hit. And an aftershock lasted for 90 seconds, a minute and a half of severe shaking, just destroying basically everything that was there. And while that was happening, the sea came back up through a river and absolutely submerged this area again. So the city was sunk again. Twice in history it was sunk. And by the time the water receded, it basically pulled everything that had been there back out into the Mediterranean Sea. So it can 100% happen. Like,
I did
it's
not know
documented.
that happened.
Yeah. So it's like, it makes sense that if you live right next to this shit and it happens, and then you write something about like this legendary land where it just disappeared because it went underneath the waves, like you might be making shit up or you might be referencing something that actually existed. So it is, by the way, like really easy to understand why ancient people believed like some divine and powerful being was behind all this. You know what I mean? Like Poseidon.
Well, in that era, right? Greek mythology and all that stuff, wasn't that pretty common?
Like everything they couldn't explain was attributed to some form of deity. And it's like if you went on a weekend holiday, and I say holiday now instead of vacation because Robin always says holiday, and you came back, your town would suddenly just be like the Mediterranean Sea. You know what I mean? Like, I know my house was there. There are waves there right now. I think my neighbor's dead.
Did they have home insurance back then?
No. They most certainly, I don't know. They were Greeks, so maybe they did. The Greeks were super smart. But it's like, it's really easy to understand why you would think a god did it, because you'd probably think that was possible too. So that's me like paraphrasing the idea behind what was written. But I don't want to move forward just yet. I want to take a quick peek behind the curtain at the actual mythology of Atlantis, because I didn't really touch on it very much. I kind of just touched on like what story started, because there's another work that started to be written about this, and he never finished it. So like people have added more onto it. Like Plato learned from Socrates. Okay, let me get this right. Socrates taught Plato. Then Plato wrote his stuff. Then after Plato was Aristotle, and he added some onto that, and then other people added onto that. Side note, Aristotle taught Alexander the Great, who took over a bunch of stuff. That shit doesn't matter. That's just me making sure that I remembered all this stuff correctly. So, we're going to do the mythology of Atlantis, and this is supposed to be like the official mythology story. So there was this god named Poseidon, and some old gods before him were like, all right, you're really cool. We're going to give you this island. And Poseidon was like, wait. And then he saw this human named, and I'm not going to get this name right, Cleito, Cleito, or Cleito. And he was like, hey, girl, what's up?
Wow.
So they obviously had 5 sets of twins, because you can never go wrong with twins. I mean, we're talking about a god banging a human. So 5 sets of twins being the thing that you're incredulous at is kind of funny. But you know how twins are always like, well, technically, I came out a few minutes earlier, so I'm the oldest. All these sets were like that too. And the fart sniffer, who was technically the oldest of all 5 sets, was named Atlas. And Poseidon was like, I'm going to give these kids this sweet-ass island I got. We're going to name it after my oldest, hence Atlantis, because it's a derivative of Atlas. I'd also like to point out that's what they named the Atlantic Ocean after, supposedly.
What?
We don't know if any of this stuff is true.
Oh, okay.
But I could tell you how he divided up the land between all 10 kids. It's boring. Basically, Atlas was the king. Everyone else had stuff they ruled over. Eventually, 9500 BC hits, and they decided they're going to war it up. Already went over that stuff. And they conquered a lot of shit. And in the legend, they talk about areas they took over. They took over parts of Libya. Actually, they took over all of Libya. They took over parts of Egypt and like Italy's central region as well. And they weren't just like the conquerors that come in like, you guys are under our rule, keep doing your thing, but you belong to us. You're going to have to fight for us if we call for you. No, they weren't like that. They were assholes about it because they made people slaves. And the Athenians were like, oh, hell no. And they formed this alliance of Athenians, and they decided that they were going to battle the Atlanteans, and they won. So they gave them the boot, and the Athenians go home, and they're like, we kicked ass. The Atlanteans went home and they're like, how did we lose, man? We were up like 3-1. It was a best of 7 series. Like, this never fucking happens. Shout out to the 2016 Chicago Cubs.
Oh my goodness.
And then the ground began to shake. And here's a nice little excerpt for you. And this is from the myth. And this is supposedly what happened. Quote, afterwards, there occurred violent earthquakes and floods. And in a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. For which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way, and this was caused by the subsidence of the island. So it's basically saying, like, not only did we sink that ship, but you can't sail over it anymore because that's where an island used to be, and it's now basically unsaleable waters.
Wow.
So basically the gods buried those slaving assholes. And now I read that Poseidon did this as punishment for invading the other lands. I also read that the earthquake was caused by Zeus, who was like, my brother has this island of his asshole nephews and nieces, and I cannot stand them anymore. And he just got rid of them. And that's basically the myth of Atlantis. Now, you're going to find like different things wherever you look, no doubt. There's like a Wikipedia specifically for Atlantis, which treats it like fact.
No way.
And it's it's really annoying to me because I was reading some articles and like the language is very scientific because it's quoting stuff. Then it's like, this totally demolishes the idea that Plato thought of this first. And it's like someone quoting Plato. And I'm like, so you're quoting Plato to prove that Plato wasn't the first person that thought of this. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. So when you look up stuff like this, it does get kind of annoying at people who just like draw ridiculous conclusions, which is, you know, what I do like every episode. So there's your myth. And one last thing around this story. People nowadays like to cite the Egyptians as like the true source of the Atlantean myth, but there is like literally no actual documentation from Egypt. It's just supposed to be this oral history that was first referenced by Plato. So if you're out there like, actually the Egyptians, no, you're wrong. So maybe he was actually describing something that he heard on his travels because it said that he actually went to Egypt, or maybe it was just part of like this allegory that was fictional. Again, like it's hard to figure this out 2,400 years later with Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies. You just never know. You just know it's written, you know? So it's one of those things like if you want to believe, go ahead. There's a lot of people who really believe this. And let's talk about where this place might be. So we're going to talk some locations now. So if you have that globe or atlas or your Google up, it's probably a good thing. Because when I first heard of Atlantis, and basically up until a few hours ago, I always pictured like this huge landmass in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Like, I don't know if you're the same as me. I pictured a continent about the size of like Australia that like was between America and Europe, basically.
When I think of Atlantis, I don't think of some great big place. You know what I mean? I imagine a few buildings here and there, but it's not so big that it would take up. Do you
have something that inspired your vision of Atlantis?
The Little Mermaid.
Is it The Little Mermaid?
That's the only thing that, you know what I mean? I haven't really, all growing up, The Little Mermaid was my under the sea. That's what I thought everything was like. You know what I mean? So when I think of Atlantis, that's what I think of. That, or maybe the world Jar Jar Binks is from in Star Wars.
Wow. That is kind of similar to what it looks like in that one documentary with Jason Momoa. But I just thought it was this giant place that was a continent, like a straight up continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And since like reading up on all this stuff, I've basically realized that two things are, I won't say real because it's kind of interpretive about whether or not any of this is true, but my picture of this has changed based off what I read. And my changes are that it is much smaller than I thought, and it is not really located where I thought, like in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Because of all the things that they did, they were a dick specifically to all the people in the Mediterranean. And I've seen so many maps today looking up where Atlantis was, putting it all over the globe in all different shapes.
Really?
Yeah, and like all different sizes. And like the later the time gets for when the map was drawn, the bigger Atlantis gets. Like there was one that I looked that showed it taking up almost the entire Atlantic Ocean. Like basically the Atlantic Ocean was just a river between Europe and Africa and the Atlantean continent. And the Atlantean continent stretched all the way to America and Africa. and it actually took up pieces of it. And when it sank, that's what created like the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico and all that stuff.
Okay, I was gonna say like because the world used to be Pangea.
It was.
So where would it have fit?
It looked like Pangea before like more split happened, and then like the entire Atlantic Ocean was Atlantis.
Okay.
So I'm like, I don't know. This one's kind of far fetched. Plus, it really doesn't match those dimensions that like Plato threw out there. So who really knows? But it really made me annoyed that like as time went on, people were like, no, it's got to be bigger. It's cooler if it's bigger. Like, calm your ocean boner down. But
ocean boner?
It could have been located a lot of places within the Mediterranean Sea itself, which is where you see a lot of theories come in saying like this is where we think it actually existed, or it could have been an actual place with a culture in it that sank, and people are always basically looking for it. One super popular theory is that it was located near the Strait of Gibraltar. And an interesting fact about this I found when I was like researching this particular theory is that there was an island named Spartel, Spartel, which is like Sparta, but it's its water type turtle Pokemon little brother. So that's just what I picture when I hear Spartel.
Okay.
And Spartel vanished 12,000 years ago. So if you take the 2,000 from right now and then 10,000 off of that, it's like right around the time that Plato says this shit happened. And about the time frame of it, it's pretty good. So where did it go? At that time, the oceans were rising like a ton. And I mean that. Like, they were rising to the point where like places on Greenland were becoming habitable for the first time, and places that were islands were starting to just disappear if they were lower level. And there was an earthquake and a tsunami that hit around that time as well. So no more island. It just sank. And another super interesting fact about Spartel is that they know where it is. Through satellite imaging, they found this legend. They decided to search the area it was supposed to be. It is only 60 meters or 200 feet below the water's surface.
Do they have they seen like buildings and stuff that used to exist?
They can literally see like the landmass where it used to be. I don't know if they found any buildings or signs of civilization, but it's near the Strait of Gibraltar, so it's near Spain and then the northwesternmost tip of Africa as well. And that is one of the places that folks think that Atlantis actually was. I don't think the dimensions quite match up, but this is where a lot of people think like the actual civilization of Atlantis was. So people think it could be like islands that are just outside of the Strait of Gibraltar that are just in the beginning of the Atlantic Ocean. And there's like the Canary Islands or the Madeira Islands. And the thing about those is that they still exist.
Yeah.
So it's like, did they sink and then come back up? So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And there's not a lot of stuff that's been seen from satellite imaging around those islands as places that are...
Could be like a bigger size.
Yeah, where it's like, oh, we see that part of this collapsed at one point in time. Like, that's just like not a thing. So I think those theories are kind of funny because I'm like, I think you're kind of stretching. But some folks also think that it's Northern Europe. So like the North Sea, which if you don't know where that is, picture the UK and then Norway. And there's a sea between them. I'm pretty sure the listener, Sam, who's like one of our first fans / listeners / spooky friends ever, pretty sure she's actually an Atlantean. So she could tell us if this is true or not. That'd be great. But a lot of people place it right there in the middle of the sea. I don't know why they'd be messing with people in the Mediterranean if they had the UK right there, though. You figure they would have made war with their neighbors before they decided to sail all the way through the Strait of Gibraltar and be like, what's up, dicks? We're going to take everything over.
Well, I mean, maybe they were like, maybe we shouldn't mess with our neighbors. Leave them be, and then reach out, go further, and not have the neighbors
They
bother
went
you.
and invaded a different set of gods, and those gods were like, we know you're not like locals or anything, but we're still going to sink your fucking island. So that was probably a really bad decision if that's the case. My money, personally, is somewhere inside the Mediterranean Sea. Spartel seems the most likely, but it's kind of not like sexy enough for me to 100% buy it.
Sexy enough?
I don't know what it is about Spartel. I think it's because I don't have an idea of the dimensions of it that I can really say like this really sounds like it fits. Time frame, absolutely. The fact that it exists also, really lends itself towards the credibility of it. But I don't really think I'd buy 100% into anything being Atlantis at this point. But it does kind of get more interesting because if this place got, sunk by the gods, they probably wouldn't leave any evidence anyways, Like if it was 12,000 years ago, like it's probably been long covered by mud and whale poop. Like if the gods are really going to do their job. Poop? I just imagine like the mud at the bottom of the sea is like 50-50. Like half of it's mud, half of it's whale poop. Oh my goodness, okay. Or kraken poop. I don't know. So
it's all the kraken.
All the kraken. There's two. There's supposed to be two, right? That's what we were talking about in this general region. Yeah. That they said there's two and the ocean couldn't sustain more than two or else nothing would exist. Yeah. All right.
Listen back to other episodes.
Listen to the Kraken episode if you know what the hell I'm talking about. So if this place existed, and it's actually a place similar to Helike, where it just like got wiped off the Earth, what really happened to it? Well, like I mentioned, during this time, the sea level was rising significantly. Glaciers were melting at a rapid rate. Parts of Greenland, like I mentioned, were starting to become uncovered. People starting to inhabit them. They're like, sweet, there's land here now. You know that land bridge between Alaska and Russia?
Yes.
That didn't exist at the time. The sea levels rose so much that those continents couldn't touch at all. Like right now, in today's world,
They
like
can't touch.
in the summer, there's water there. In the winter, it
There's
freezes
ice.
and you can drive over it.
Yeah.
At this time, like it wasn't even close. Like the water level had risen so much, there was no way. There was no land bridge. So that's just sort of what happens. And if there was an earthquake and a tsunami involved, an island definitely could have vanished, and they did vanish at this time.
I want to know if there are any listeners out there that have driven that ice bridge, because that sounds frightening. If you break through that ice, you're a goner.
Yeah, like you're pretty fucked if that happens. You have to go at the right time, and that's the other thing too. Like, what if your car breaks down and then you have to walk that shit? Like, you're probably not going to get your car back. Like, it's going to fall through at some point.
It's going to fall through into the ocean.
Yeah.
You know?
It's gone.
Who is brave enough to do that? I want to know if there are any listeners that are brave enough to do that have done that, and let us know how it was and how you did it, because
I will
be
be
really
shocked
cool.
if we reach enough people where someone has actually done that, but then, like,
will be thoroughly
we'll make a patch and
impressed.
send it to a bunch of people are going to make it up. Like, I've totally done that. I'm an ice trucker. You're a liar is what you are. But I don't
What
know.
if there is one out? Don't say that.
Take pics, Facebook Live. So I hope you're really interested to know too, though.
Yeah, that's really curious.
So like you mentioned, I thought like maybe meteor or asteroid, no signs of impact around here at all.
I mentioned that. Did I mention that earlier in the
You did.
episode or earlier in the day? Because I know I mentioned
episode.
Okay,
Earlier in the episode. That's how quickly she forgets stuff. So I thought of that. I also thought volcano would kind of explain this because like we've talked about before how volcanoes can just make an island disappear. And there's like great volcanologists out there who keep a great record, like that Spock guy, I'm pretty sure is a volcanologist. And there isn't one that really matches up with this region until like 1450 BC. And that's only like 1,000 years before Plato. So it's like way off. It's like 8,000 years off. You're still laughing about my Spock joke.
Yeah.
So maybe Plato just exaggerated the time because it was still fresh in people's minds that something could happen where an island would vanish in an instant, you know? And the thing about that explosion, though, is that it was catastrophic without a doubt, but it didn't wipe out the islands that it occurred on. I can't remember the name of one of them. It starts with an S. It also affected Crete, and people like it completely destroyed Crete. It really didn't. That's just an exaggeration of what happened. Crete still exists, and it's just beautiful. The island this took place on still exists, and it's beautiful. So they most definitely didn't sink. So volcanoes, meteors, asteroids, those are kind of out. So let's theorize a little bit based off of what we know could have occurred and did occur at
Is
the
it
time.
possible that the Earth shifted a certain way and caused the moon to come closer in a certain spot
No,
and rise the
that
water
is not
levels?
possible at all.
I mean,
It would have been catastrophic across the world.
Okay.
That would have affected all tides completely. So I like where your head's at with the Earth shifting, but you're thinking of like Earth floating through space being like, ooh, sorry, I got the shakes for a second. And it's like, oh, fuck, I got closer. Everyone's going to die now. By the way, any fans of Dragon Ball Z out there, when Piccolo blew up that moon, he killed the fucking world. I'm just saying, like, if you Google what would happen if the Earth or the moon didn't exist, it is insane. So Piccolo, thanks for that shit. All right, we're going to get back to this for a second. So we're going to theorize. We know about earthquakes. We know about rising seas. We know there were tsunamis going on. So let's picture this. Say you live on an island. And again, this is easier for some of us to picture than others.
Okay.
You have lived in Hawaii.
Uh-huh.
You've lived on an island. Sam out there, she's lived on an island. A lot of us are from the United States. And we've only lived on this giant landlocked landmass unless you're
Does
on
it
one of the
count
coasts.
if you've been on like a lakefront?
Lakefront might work, but it would have to be a very large lake, you know? Just imagine that you're on an island where you can get shore to shore in a relatively short amount of time, but you're surrounded by water on all sides, okay? And we know that this was happening, and the sea level is rising and rising. And what's super interesting about this to me is I can relate to that part because I grew up near Lake Michigan. I grew up in Northwest Indiana, like really, really close to the shore, and beaches and properties that I remember from when I was a teenager, so like 20 years ago, are disappearing because the Great Lakes are rising at a significant rate. And because of all the rain that just happened, it rose like 3 trillion gallons, like just in the last few months from all the rain.
So I grew up in Maui, and there's a beach in Maui. There's like a Kaanapali beach in Maui. I say that like horribly because I'm not super local, you know what I mean? But there's the beach there, and growing up, it was a huge stretch of beach, and it was really long. And then when I moved back there, when I was an adult, pretty much, the beach had crept up so much to, I think it was the Hyatt or something, the back of one of the hotels that were on the beach. They had to put sandbags out there because the water was creeping up to the hotel. There was like no walkway left.
That's over the course of our lives.
Yes.
Which is literally like, I'm 34 years old. You know what I mean? You are younger than I am. Like, extrapolate that by a few hundred years and then increase the rate at which it's rising. And then on top of that, like, picture in your mind's eye just like things that are near the shore just washing away. Like the land's eroding, anything that was built on the shore is just slowly disappearing. And I think that's something you can legitimately imagine. And be in this scenario and then imagine an earthquake. I don't know if any of you have ever been in an earthquake. We have a lot of listeners from California. Most of them most likely have. But it's just violent shaking that just doesn't stop for a significant amount of time. Like, you think about it, like, it shook for a minute. A minute's not that long. If everything in your house is shaking, collapsing, and crumbling, it's a very long time. And especially in the era this was supposed to take place, imagine the shaking happening as violent as you can imagine, to the point where buildings would collapse, and it just keeps going. And your shoreline that's been eroding is definitely going to start collapsing at this point. If you have mountains surrounding you, which it said this place did, they would start having landslides, some of which would slide into the sea, some of which would slide into these plains. So it is legitimately catastrophic. And then the sea would recede from the shoreline. And everyone kind of knows what that means. It means that this island is literally sinking at this point, and it's going to get hit by a tsunami, straight up. The tsunami is going to hit it, and whatever just happened is going to get significantly worse. And let's talk about the tsunami, okay? And we're going to go big. Everyone goes big. Everyone makes Atlantis huge. I'm not going to make Atlantis huge. I'm going to make the catastrophe huge. Because if it existed and it's gone now, and we can't find it, it had to have been a catastrophic event of epic proportions.
Is there a tsunami in is it Godzilla that has a tsunami in it, or?
Yeah, Godzilla does have a tsunami in it.
Because that's how I'm imagining the tsunami had to be to wipe out.
Yeah, it hits Hawaii, where like the ocean recedes, it comes in, and it comes in with Godzilla.
Yeah.
Yeah. So picture whatever you need to see that ocean recede, okay? In this case, the Mediterranean Sea. I'm going to talk about tsunamis. When I was a kid, I remember hearing about tsunamis, and back then they were just all called tidal waves because no one really called them the appropriate thing. And I remember hearing about one that was, and it sticks out in my mind, 100 meters tall. It sticks out in my mind because I didn't know how tall that was in feet. I was like, how big is a meter? I hate this metric system. Well, 100 meters tall is 328 feet. I know, us and like one other country on the planet, it still uses empirical. It's so dumb. But 328 feet, that's like 32 stories. Can you imagine what that would do to an island? Well, don't bother, because it doesn't matter. That was kid Adam. That was what I heard when I was a kid. 100 meters tall, 328 feet. There can't be a tidal wave bigger than that. Well, there can be, and there was. The largest recorded tsunami, recorded as in we've actually witnessed, seen, and like measured it through scientific means to see exactly how tall it was. And I say exactly, it's not an exact science, but it's pretty effing close.
Not with Godzilla.
Not from Godzilla. This actually happened. This is 100% true. I heard about this as an adult. Research has gotten significantly better. There was a tsunami recorded on July 9th, 1958. I put 85. It's actually 58.
Was it in Hawaii?
It was not in Hawaii. It was in Alaska.
Whoa.
And it was supposed to be huge. The science to measure it, I watched this entire documentary about how they measured it. They measured, okay, I'll get to it. So 100% true. Happened in Alaska. It was, okay, I'll get to the location. I have it later on in this thing. But basically there was this massive earthquake. Then there was a landslide from a mountain. What they measured was how much of the mountain fell off and fell into this bay, because that is what caused this massive tsunami. A landslide from this mountain hit this body of water. The resulting tsunami was 524 meters tall.
Way.
This is 100% true. It's 1,720 feet high.
How does any of Alaska still exist?
They show the map about how this water flowed from the bay out into the northern Pacific Ocean, and it was like just fucking everything near this bay was just underwater. Like The trees like didn't stand a chance, man. Like 1,720 feet tall. You know what I relate this to? I just said I grew up in Northwest Indiana. That's the Chicagoland area. So of course I relate this to the Sears Tower. It's called the Willis Tower now. No one calls it that. It's always the Sears Tower. It is one of the tallest buildings in the world. When it was built, it was the tallest building in the world. If you go to the top of the building structure, it is 1,450 feet tall. It has those big antennas on the top because they used to like build those because they were thinking about docking blimps back in the day when they thought those were going to be like the means of transportation. The tippy top of the highest antenna on the Sears Tower is 1,729 feet up. This wave was so tall, it would have completely engulfed the Sears Tower in its entirety. That building is 110 stories tall. It has more above that, and it has antennas on the top of it.
I think you need to calm down your tsunami boner.
I have a huge tsunami boner right now. But, like, imagine that wave. How tall that would be. If anyone's been to the Sears Tower and stood at the base and looked up at it, imagine the very top is just a wall of water. The best thing you can attribute this to, because this is the dimension that they use for the movie,
you.
that is the wave, the size of the wave supposedly that they use to scale for the day after tomorrow, that just sweeps in and just like covers New York City. So it actually is probably smaller in that movie because it would have been higher than the Empire State Building. So that is terrifying. Now put yourself back on that crippled, crumbling island, seeing something this size coming at you. Granted, I'm not saying that there was a landslide from a mountain that collapsed into the water, but there could have been. This thing was surrounded by mountains everywhere. It's stated in all the lore about this thing. It's stated in the dimensions. Like, even Poseidon talks about, like, those are some pretty sweet fucking islands at some point in this myth.
What?
So if you're talking about this massive wave hitting this island, it is totally understandable that through this, I mean, it's still shaking from aftershocks. Land is falling everywhere into the sea. This scenario we just made, this island would not stand a chance. And it's not just a wave that washes over it. It's a tsunami that hits and just leaves massive amounts of water behind. And it would just absolutely devastate everything. And we already know that tsunamis have buried parts of land in this area in the past. So it's
Huge.
totally feasible.
That's crazy.
It's very possible that these things could combine and make an island simply disappear in a day, like the legend states, especially with those aftershocks, which would cause additional waves to just pummel this island. And it would certainly seem like an act of God to anyone, especially at 9500 BC. Because, like, if you were in
There's no science for it.
anywhere near the area, you know, like, we don't have lots of things from that era of civilization at all.
Really?
Like, you'd notice the waves, you'd notice the earthquake without a doubt. There's just not a lot of stuff recorded. Like, we can go back and carbon date stuff and talk about
I see what you're saying.
what was found from 9500, but there's just not, like, written record of people saying, like, dude, the earth shook and this fucking island disappeared. It was nuts. So, like,
because all the record anyway would have been destroyed by now. Or
realistically,
okay.
like, it was probably all in Pompeii, and that shit's all fucking gone now. Thanks, Vesuvius. But
Jeez.
if it wasn't recorded after a few hundred years of this happening, just being passed down through verbal history, like, how much do people doubt stuff from, like, the last generation? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, discoveries always get cast in doubt the further away you get from them. So after a few hundred years, people would certainly begin to doubt it. What would happen after 9,000 years? That just brings us to the time of Plato. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's definite that it could have existed, which is my way of combining definite and could. It equals probable. You know what I mean? This could have been a legend that he heard talked about. And I was like, sure, I'll toss that shit into my new book. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with on Atlantis, because this is a really long topic, and I don't know why I went first, but the last thing I'm going to leave you with is this. Hearing of earthquakes and tsunamis, I was like, I wonder if there's a fault line anywhere near the Mediterranean. That's why I said you're getting close to where I was thinking when it came to the earth shifting, just in a different way. So I checked. There is one. And it's not a small one. There's a bunch of fault lines all over the world, right? The big ones, like the massive ones where the big catastrophic events happens, are along what's called the continental plates. Totally talked about this before. There are 7 massive plates for the entire Earth, right? Mm-hmm. It's where the continents sit on top of. 2 in particular are the Eurasian plate. The reason it's called that is because it has all of Europe and all of Asia on top of it. So it's enormous. The one below that is the African plate. It has all of the continent of Africa and a giant portion of the Atlantic and Indian Ocean. So it covers both the sides of Africa. And where those two meet is right above Africa, just below Italy. It literally runs through the Mediterranean Sea, the fault between those two massive plates. They literally run through not just the Mediterranean Sea, but the Strait of Gibraltar, which is where the continent of Africa and the continent of Europe almost touch. There's that little water strip that leads you into the Mediterranean Sea. The massive fault runs underneath the water there, which is where that island disappeared 9,500 years ago.
So it's possible that that fault swallowed that island?
Legitimately, we could have had an event happen that's not recorded where not only did something sink, but it fucking vanished because that fault just annihilated it to literally nothing. So people that are like, let's search the ocean floor for like cobblestones and see if we can find like walkways, like that's what I was saying, like mud and whale poop. It's like, it's just probably not there anymore. If it ever existed, it's probably just gone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because all these things are combining, like the time of Atlantis, the location, the area having a history of this, to say like, you don't know if it actually existed, but if it did, it's gone. You know what I mean? So check your maps, because if you're near a fault line, it's more likely that we are going to witness something happening like Atlantis than us actually discovering Atlantis. In my mind, just watching something get completely wiped off the map by a continental shift type of event. So, like I said, check those fault lines, see how close you are, because maybe someday soon, you could also be making out with Jason Momoa underwater, because you never know what could happen. And
you and Jason Momoa,
is that really that bad? Like, let's be real. But that, my friends, is the story as told by me of Atlantis.
Cool.
So, hope you enjoyed it.
That's a lot of research.
There was a lot of research. I know it was really long, but hey, I got excited. I wanted to cover it and do my due diligence.
Yeah, this is going to be a long episode.
It is going to be a long episode. I warned you of that before we started recording. So,
okay.
Hopefully you folks liked it. I wanted to make sure I kicked this one in the ass for the patrons, because they demanded it of us and I wanted to deliver. So I hope I did that.
All right. Cool. Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. So the second topic that you folks chose was you wanted a haunting of some sort. And you can tell my choices were the very vague ones. So I was like, haunting, cryptid.
Mine were, what were mine again? Atlantis.
You had very specific. So you had Atlantis, Sasquatch,
and Stonehenge.
Which
I'm totally covering Stonehenge soon. That stuff is so cool.
And mine were super vague. I was just like, I have an idea. I don't know.
Yours was like haunting, true crime. Yeah. I don't remember what your third one was.
Cryptid.
Was it cryptid?
Yeah, so it's just
someone commented like, I like how there's the category of cryptid and the category of Sasquatch.
So we'll see. That's how different Adam and I are. You can tell which ones are Adam's and which ones are mine, because I'm just like, I'm gonna pick out of the hat. Boop.
I have very specific ideas. My biggest fear in the show is that I'm gonna do hours of searching for a topic, not hours of doing research, just trying to find things. So if I think of stuff,
but the world is full of mysteries.
It is, but we're at 81 episodes, man. We covered a lot of mysteries. Episodes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's been so great getting suggestions for topics from so many people. So if you have any of our social medias and you want to suggest us something, totally suggest it. We love getting suggestions from everyone. That's why I have topics like shit I just haven't thought about. Like, I didn't think about Atlantis for a really long time. I didn't think about Stonehenge until a few weeks ago. You know what I mean? So
nice.
Very much appreciate the suggested topics and you folks picking stuff for us, because that makes the hardest decision of figuring out which one we're going to cover this week, out of our hands.
So, again, if you guys want to help us choose topics in the future, patreon.com/scaryish-podcast starts with the Choose Your Own Adventure tier and up if you guys want to help us choose our topics. So
it's only $3 a month.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to get into my topic with the thanks of you guys. And I chose Haunted Death Valley. And I know it's not a very specific haunting, but you'd be surprised with how many strange things happen in the desert.
It's called Death Valley.
Yeah. It's a place with a really long history, and it's not surprising. You can literally die out there if you get lost. You know what I mean?
I've heard so many stories of people
going
out
have
into the
lost their
desert.
Lives just not being prepared.
Or they're prepared and something breaks down. There was a UFC fighter who went out there and I think his motorcycle stopped working, or he just got lost and he dehydrated and died in the desert. It was super sad.
During the early 1900s, it really wasn't uncommon to come across human remains while mining for gold. You
can totally picture that in like a Western movie.
Yeah.
Where someone's just like walking through like the shimmering desert and they see like a human skeleton getting picked at by a buzzard.
Yeah.
But it's just like pure white bones.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally
it
see
happens. Apparently, there's a ghost town called Skidoo that exists there. And it's spelled Skidoo. So when I think of Skidoo, I'm thinking of the
Skidoo.
The Skidoo that you ride at the lake.
Skis.
Yeah.
That's what they're named after. You know that.
Shut the front door.
I'm just totally making shit up.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, I seriously had no idea that this ghost town existed out there. And Death Valley, to me, has always been just a desert area that is just ridiculously dangerous to spend too much time in if you're unprepared. But this town was, or is, an old gold mining settlement who's seemingly only kept alive by a single, I'm sure it's not a single sign, but it's a sign that's erected by the National Park Service that tells you where this place is. And it was at its height back in 1907 when it was home to around 700 residents, which in this day and age really isn't a lot, but back then, that's a lot of people.
Like, imagine making your own town, you know what I mean? Like, you invite all your friends, can you populate it with 700 people? Probably not.
Yeah, it's might not be a lot, but hello, it's Death Valley. Like, they're living in Satan's armpit, you know?
I was wondering what body part you were going to pick for that.
I was going between butt, armpit,
I heard the B form on your lips, and then you went with armpit.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, it's like, it's hot.
I think other people out there thought you were going to say Satan's butthole, because that's where I thought you were going with that. I'm just pointing that out there.
Okay, anyway, it's hot, you know what I mean? And these people are there during the gold rush, the era of gold discovery. There was a town newspaper, there was a bank, there was a school, they had their own telephone service, at least one saloon. Hello, saloon, you gotta have a saloon. At least one saloon. And a brothel. You can't go without one of those.
At least 5 brothels. Hashtag Braun is my keeper of coin.
I talked to my sister about that, by the way. It's super funny. She's like, I don't know if they should have trusted Braun with all the money, but okay. Anyway, by 1916, the population was dwindling, and the town was being plucked apart by scavengers. So unless you're planning on exploring the old mine shafts that exist there isn't really much left to see of the area. It's just a bunch of glass and stuff that's hanging around, but like the buildings aren't really erected anymore. It's just seriously ghost town area.
It's what you picture when you picture ghost town in your brain.
Well, when I picture a ghost town, I'm thinking of like the buildings from the Old West and just nobody there.
I picture a bunch of ghosts walking around and being like, what's up? And just talking to each other, like carrying ghost newspapers.
Oh, that'd be so cute.
And a cute tune playing in the background while they walk and they're whistling.
Oh my gosh. It's just like Coco or something, right? Like a whole town.
Haven't seen it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Anyway, Skidoo happens to have a haunting specter that hangs around in this town. And there's a legend told of a man named Joe Hooch Simpson. I know what you're thinking about Hooch, but okay.
No, Hooch means booze, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking you were laughing for a different reason.
Because Hooch rhymes with cooch?
Oh my god. Okay, whatever. Is
that why you thought I was laughing, though?
No, I was thinking something completely different.
Well, tell us what you were thinking.
I thought you were laughing because it's like Hooch, like Hoochie Mama.
Oh, no.
Okay, anyway. Whatever. So, this guy, Hooch, he was named so for his excessive drinking. He just had this drinking problem. And he shot and killed the town banker in 1908. And some sources say he was a town deputy that was abusing his power at the time. Other sources say he was a saloon manager. I'm assuming they didn't really document this case as well as they could have or something like that. There's just not documentation.
He was probably in charge of documenting it back in the day.
Yeah, he was at
the deputy do it.
He ran the DMV. It's all just word of mouth stories, you know what I mean? And well, kind of like this podcast, we're word of mouth stories, like the story of Atlantis.
The Storytime episodes, yeah. We do a lot of research in the other ones, though. That's not just like some dude at Smith's today told me the story of Atlantis, y'all.
That would be so cool.
That would be really funny if someone randomly came up and was like, let me tell you a ghost story. And I'm like, I got some shit to tell you folks.
So Hooch drunkenly approached said banker named Jim Arnold and insisted that the banker give him $20. And $20 now might not seem like a lot, but $20 back in the day is almost $600 today.
I got really excited for the inflation adjustment because I'm a huge nerd.
So $600 is a lot of money. And cool fact, something that cost $20 today would have only been 75 cents back then.
Wow. That's a cool
insane.
fact.
That is really neat. I want those prices back. Thanks. Jim refused, obviously, to give him that money. And Hooch just decided to pull the trigger, and Jim died later that day while Hooch went around bragging about his actions. And I just think, like, what a sicko. How can you kill this dude?
What an idiot, man. Like, why would you brag about that? Like,
some people are just that. Like, I think there was a case where a couple kids killed someone, and the kids, being kids, went around and talked about the fact and bragged about the fact they killed this couple, and they just went around talking about it. Some people are just that messed up.
this was like the true crime thing you were going to cover, isn't it?
No, that's just something that I think I read about or heard about recently. Anyway, people are just messed up, okay? The world is a fucked up place. Outraged, the town took justice into their own hands, and they formed a mob and hanged Hooch on a telephone pole right next to the sheriff's office. And just imagine a whole town, maybe not a whole town, maybe not all 700 of the people went and did it, but
they got a lynch mob together,
yeah.
And they're like, we're going to kill this dude.
Right. And they left him there, strung up for the town to see. That's super ballsy, doing that and hanging him outside the sheriff's office. And what is the sheriff going to do? Arrest the whole town? You know what I mean?
It's like that thing we saw in Drunk History about the town, like, in the 60s who legitimately had a guy who would show up and do awful things, and then he eventually shot someone, and the town was like, you know what? Screw this. And a bunch of them found the dude in an alley getting into his car.
The town that got away with murder.
One person shot him, and no one could figure out which one of those people that were holding guns shot him. And yeah, that's what they called it, the town that got away with murder. And like, this is a bit different, but it's still very, very similar. There's stories like this all over the United States of America of people with murder boners, like seeing an opportunity to like dispense justice and being like, let's go kill that dude.
Where's the trigger?
Where's the trigger?
Swear to me.
If Robert Pattinson doesn't work out, Robin's got this shit covered.
A reporter came in from LA and was disappointed to have missed taking a photo of the hanged body. So what did the town do for them? They freaking dug up his body. And
oh my God.
They strung him right back up for the reporter to take photographs. How messed up is that?
The original stunting for social media. Like, oh shit, you missed it, dog? Let me get that body again.
That has to definitely be one of the big reasons why, if it is his ghost that's haunting them, he's haunting them. I mean, if you want ghosts, that's how you get ghosts. It's just, I cannot believe this town did that. Who does that?
Who misses a photo op, though? And back in the day, you had to stand there for 30 seconds, so they were super excited for that.
Well, one of the sites that I read about all this stuff on, a local doctor wanted to test Hooch for syphilis, but instead of just testing his blood, they freaking cut off his head. They cut off his head, and it said that a headless ghost walks around town at night as well as a cemetery.
Maybe
Go fig. Maybe, I mean...
Maybe it was their first day, and they're like, how do you test for syphilis again? Boss, I got the head. What do I do next? And they're like, God damn it, not again.
It's just, oh my gosh. Okay. It's not my place to say whether or not what they did was justified, but what they did to his body is definitely messed up. Like, oh my gosh. Even if he did kill that banker, they totally desecrated everything about that
guy. Then another newspaper guy showed up, and they're like, oh, we drew dicks on his face this time.
Anyway, I do wonder why it is that it would be his ghost that haunts Ski-Doo and not that of the bankers. But with how much they tortured his body, I mean...
The banker was a decent person. Maybe even though he was murdered, he might have rested in peace.
Or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas, like a lot of times, evil people, like, kind of hang around, especially if they, like, were dispensed justice and weren't too happy about it. Then they're, like, basically just desecrating his body after that. So like you said, if you want ghosts, that's how you get ghosts.
Anyway, as the story goes... Over the years, visitors have come to Ski-Doo and reported hearing the sound of gunshots and men talking. Supposedly, some reports have the sounds matching the time of the banger's death and Hooch's hanging. So it said if you walk around Ski-Doo on April 22nd at around 2 in the afternoon, be on your toes listening for some phantom gunshots. like the one that killed Jim Arnold. And you might even hear the sound of a town mob roaming the area, which is pretty cool. I think that'd be really neat and frightening to hear if that, I were around to hear it.
Imagine a couple hundred years from now when flash mobs just start showing up everywhere.
Oh, my goodness. Again, this totally reminds me of, or it makes me think of these things as just scars in time. And I'll never not say it, but these ghosts just sound like the ghost sounds of the mob. It's just an intense moment in time rippling throughout it. And a very wise person once said,
Hate you.
Adam's going to be so upset. People assume that time is a strict progression of cause and effect. But actually, from a nonlinear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
David Tennant was the one that said that as Doctor Who.
Moffat was the one that wrote it, so.
That's very true. It is very interesting. For those of you who'd never watched Doctor Who and somehow listen to our show where we quote it all the time, to think of time as non-linear. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because for us, it's like you wake up, the sun rises, the sun sets, and our clocks measure where the sun is at based off of like whatever value we assign to it. But the idea that like time could like not be a linear thing is just so fascinating to think about.
Yeah, it's
like,
crazy.
The first time I ever thought of it as a person, like where it just like originated in my own brain, where like that concept took hold, was the idea of reincarnation. We were discussing it in college. I don't think I was in class. I think I was discussing it drunk with some friends. And I just thought like, what if when you reincarnate, you don't reincarnate in the future, you could reincarnate in the past? Like instead of everyone being like, in my past life, I was Marilyn Monroe. Like, what happens if you die in 2019
and wake up in like
and you reincarnate into
something.
like a different time in the past? So like maybe that's how people that become like super famous or super infamous or just super like successful in some way, shape, or form. It's because they have some sort of intuition from their past life, which was in the future where they kind of knew what was going to happen anyways.
Yeah,
it's really weird to think of it that way. So like I love that quote from Tennant/Moffat. I won't get that mad at you for bringing it in. It's a super long tangent. I'll let you get back to it.
Well, I definitely recommend you guys watch Doctor Who if you like silly sci-fi / it's really interesting too. It's real. There's so many good episodes. But
Matt Smith's my favorite Doctor, which you hate me for.
Well, I love Tennant. Tennant's my favorite.
Tennant's great too, but Tennant has my two favorite episodes, which are The Impossible Planet and whatever the follow-up to The Impossible Planet is, because it directly
the one that's with the devil in there.
Yeah, it directly deals with the concept of like not just religion but evil in general, and like they basically just find a planet where they're like, oh, there's something here, and it's super super evil, and it just basically claims it's like it is the source of all of the universe's like representations of evil, and it's a two-parter. It's intense as shit. It's a really good episode to watch on Halloween.
Matt Smith also has a really good episode where he has his complete monologue where he's talking to that.
I'm not saying that's an amazing episode. That is an amazing scene. But it's just like those two Tennant episodes that get like so oddly deep in a silly not slapstick, but you know what I mean? Like it's a cheesy show. Yeah. But they handle that very serious topic in such a good way. But talk about that Matt Smith moment, because I know you got to bring it up.
Nah, it's fine. Just watch Doctor Who. I mean, maybe skip the first season. It's not that good.
Poor Eccleston.
I know. Sorry. But I know there's a lot of Eccleston fans out there. That's not my jam. And then watch Visions on Netflix. It's a short movie. It's the one that has not Isla Fisher. It has the other one.
We've talked about this movie a lot. We threw a lot of listeners through a loop trying to figure out what Robin was talking about.
It's not Isla Fisher. What is her name?
Amy Adams?
No, it's not. Maybe it's not Amy. It's Isla Fisher, not Amy Adams. Or is
I
it
don't
Amy
know.
Adams?
It's one of those two. I don't know because I haven't seen it.
Isla Fisher's the sillier one, right?
Yes.
Yes. Then I think it's Isla Fisher.
Okay.
I don't know. Someone's
the point of this is
go watch Visions on Netflix. It's really good. It's about what I feel like a lot of these ghosts are, where it's just a scar through time, and these mobs and these sounds that you hear are just these events echoing through time. So that's my nerdy part coming out, and I talk about it all the time, but that's what I think. Anyway, so if you want to hike around Ski-Doo, make sure that you're prepared, because it is in Death Valley and you do not want to run out of water or any of that stuff. It's a pretty difficult hike. If you want to drive, it's recommended that you have a high clearance vehicle, and be pretty prepared for a really bumpy ride, because it's not smooth sailing. Then Also, there is the Amargosa Opera House and Hotel. So you may have seen an episode of Ghost Adventures on it, but we'll just glaze right on past that. And the Amargosa is located in Death Valley Junction, which is a few miles west of the California-Nevada border near Death Valley National Park. And apparently Amargosa means bitter water in Paiute, or I don't know if that's true because you can't really believe everything you read on the internet, and I don't speak Paiute. And then
what is Paiute?
Like a Native American part.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, right on.
Another source said that it stems from the Spanish word for bitter, which is amargo. So I don't speak Spanish either. I Googled that one though. I did Google Translate, and that's legit. I don't know which one's I don't know.
We don't know which one's the actual origin for the word.
Right. And the internet's a confusing place. You know, there's too much information. Too many options is a prison. Okay. Anyway, it's supposedly one of the top 10 haunted hotels in the country, but everyone says that about their hotel. So take that with a grain of salt.
I've heard that at least 50 times, and I'm just starting to say, like, I think some of these people are making up their own lists.
The town of Death Valley Junction originally had a saloon, a store, and of course, you guessed it, a brothel. The town was a stop along the Death Valley Railroad in 1914. Borax, which I had no idea was a thing. I thought it was like a cleaning. No, that's Ajax.
No, borax exists too.
Oh, yeah?
Like when they taught everyone to make like that slime stuff in like 3rd or 4th grade at my school.
Oh, they put that in there?
Borax is one of the things that you put in there, yeah.
Okay, so borax was mined in the local hills and was carried along that railroad line until 1928 when the operations ceased. And you can imagine that after that, things began to decline because there's no business going back and forth anymore. And the mining company kind of left the town to fend for themselves, relying on tourists and their business. The hotel was built in the 1920s by the Pacific Borax Mining Company and was built to house the mine workers. Since the 1960s, though, it was owned by a Miss Marta Beckett up until her death in 2017 at the age of 92. So she lived a long life.
That is a long life.
Marta Beckett was a dancer from New York and happened to get a flat tire while on the road trip with her then husband.
She's like, I guess we just live here now.
Well, okay, so what happened was, according to Marta, they got a flat tire, so they hung out around there, and then she looked through a little hole into the opera house. So she looked into the opera house, and when she did that, she said that she saw the second half of her life. Like, she decided, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So she at first rented out the place, and then they ended up buying it and restored it for her to perform in, pretty much. Her first performance, she did in front of 12 people. She just wanted to perform. That's all she wanted to do. And she painted murals all along the walls that look just like a whole bunch of people looking down at the stage, kind of like creating her own audience,
right,
which I think is really cool. She performed in the opera house well into her 80s.
Wow.
So, yeah. I think her last performance was 2012, and then she passed away 2017. So, although there isn't a long history of tragedy in the area, it's said that the Amargosa is home to a myriad of spirits of varying genders and ages. There's even a ghost, quote unquote ghost, or a mysterious / curious cat that was known to disrupt Marta's performances at the opera house. So I think that's adorable. Tom Willett, Marta's former partner, is also said to haunt the opera house, sitting in one of the chairs observing her performances.
That's adorable.
That is very sweet. A building at the rear of the property is said to be where a young girl drowned in the pool. A group that visited the area reported gardening tools swinging when there was no wind or drafts within the room, and a girl's giggling or crying can be heard there, which I think is super creepy.
Yeah,
you all know,
super creepy.
You all know how much I cannot deal with children's laughter that is just disembodied, doesn't belong to any children or anything.
I know we've had this debate
out.
before, but like disembodied children crying or disembodied children laughing, which is creepier?
Laughing.
You think it's laughing?
I think laughing.
I think crying at this point in my life, I'm sure it's going to switch back and forth. This point would be creepier because it's like it's a child in distress, and I wouldn't know if it's a ghost that's just messing with me or La Lucchesa trying to like lure me out or some shit like that.
See, now I'm getting anxiety just thinking about it, because like laughter could mean they're like they're going to do something bad to you.
That's the other thing, though.
Like
With
Chucky.
laughter, it presents the possibility that it's a playful, nice ghost.
Or it's a playful bad ghost.
Yeah, but there's the possibility of it being playful and nice. If it's crying, even if it's nice, it's in distress, and that's creepy to me. So I think that's why right now I'm going with crying ghost.
Okay. I see your standpoint. I understand it. I respect it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
An unrenovated section of the hotel is affectionately referred to as Spooky Hollow by the staff, and it was formerly a dormitory for the miners as well as a hospital and morgue at one point. Strange things do happen in the area. Photos taken in the area are inundated with orbs, and whether you believe those are signs of ghosts or not is up to you to decide, but I think having that kind of evidence is pretty cool. People report seeing what seems like apparitions of miners in their old-fashioned attire. Room 34 is said to be haunted by Mary, having had multiple reports of people seeing an apparition and feelings of unease in that room. Room 24 have repeated reports of hearing a child crying in the middle of the night, even though no children were staying in the hotel. And this is said to be the ghost of a girl that actually drowned in the bathtub in 1967. Which is so scary if there were actually an event that led... Oh, man. There are also said to be mysterious wet footprints that appear.
That I fucking can't stand. The idea of like wet footprints showing up or muddy footprints or bloody handprints, like anything like that, because it's like, you're not going to get it clean.
Have we covered Alcatraz? Jesus.
Yes, we have covered Alcatraz before.
Because there's a handprint or something in a jail cell at Alcatraz that they kept trying to clean, and it wouldn't come off. It would keep appearing. Like, it would come off, but it would come back again and again and again. Because, like, some guy was going to die. He was going to go get electrocuted or something. And he, like, put his hand on the wall or something like that and said something, and then...
I remember there was this show called Fact or Fiction, and it was like they would tell you, like, 3 stories... or 3 or 4 stories, and like you never knew how many of them were going to be real and how many of them were going to be fake. And it was, they used that as the inspiration for one of them, and it was that a guard assaulted him and he was bleeding and he put his hand on the wall, and that's what caused the stain. And that no matter what they do, they can't get the stain to go away. But of course, in like the dramatization, they like take out the chunk of drywall and put the like new drywall in, and then the handprint appears again in front of like the guard who assaulted him, who then gets choked to death and is found with like bloody handprints around their neck. They really like hammed it up, but I know the legend you're talking about, but when you talk about that, I still see the dramatization, which is totally not real.
Okay.
And I'm just like, if I were the type of person who just like told stories and didn't like fact check, like I would just change that story to what the dramatization was and be like, nope, totally documented, that 100% happened. It was on Fact or Fiction.
I'm thinking of that Blackpink song now that you have stuck in your head. Because there's one point where they say fat checks and fact checks.
I always thought they were saying fat chicks, and I'm like, that's really rude.
Oh, no, she says fat checks. In the music video, she like moves her fingers like money. Fat checks.
Okay.
Anyway, okay, so room 32 is said to be home to a malevolent spirit, giving visitors the heebie-jeebies. A mining boss used to stay in that room, and it said a hanging actually took place there during the Borax era. I like to call it the Borax era. I don't know what else to call it.
That works. That's catchy.
Oh, thanks. Pushing and shoving are said to be experienced in this room, as well as a sense of dread and foreboding, which means don't freaking go in there. Room 9 is thought to be the most haunted of them all. A number of people have reported having their legs and feet held down during their sleep. They've also reported the door knob turning, only to open the door and have no one be on the other side, which freaks me out. Sounds of children giggling and running down the hall has also been heard. And if you saw pics of this hotel, you'd see how small these halls are and how hard it would be for kids to be running up and down the halls and not get stopped or caught.
Sounds like something for the Instagram for sure.
Yeah. The dining room has been reported to be an area where voices are heard, like the sounds of a group of people and a particular high-pitched voice of a woman. Guests and workers have reported phantom smells of lilacs. That's how you spell it, right? Lilac, or say it? Lilac.
Yes, okay. Lilacs.
The sound of babies crying and full apparitions. Strange noises are heard from within the walls. Shadows are seen dancing across the opera house stage, which freaks me out.
It's pretty cool, though. I like the idea of her still dancing.
Sounds of footsteps crossing rooms in the night and walking down hallways. Even showers turn on and off by themselves. There have been recorded phenomenon, be it in photos, videos, or EVPs at this location. There are also so many photos with orbs and things like that. So we took my sister took a whole lot of pictures when we went to the Winchester, and none of them had that in there.
Yeah, there were no orbs.
No.
There was a bunch of people that didn't exist.
She was really scared. She was really scared of going through them because she's like, what if I see something? But there weren't any. So take that however you wish. It's not uncommon for guests to pack and leave abruptly in the middle of the night. One of the creepier ghosts is a hitchhiker that walks along the nearby road and unlocks vehicles and lets himself in. But when I read that, I was like, what if he's a real person?
That's just getting into your vehicle?
Yes.
Wait, did you say he locks vehicles or unlocks?
He unlocks vehicles and lets himself in.
I thought I heard locks. I was like, wait, so he gets in the vehicles and locks people out?
No, he unlocks them so he can get in. But what if that's like a real person? That's what freaks me out, because I don't want some like random hitchhiker to...
You'd rather have a ghost in your car with you?
Ghost. No, at least he'll disappear eventually, I hope. Don't at me, ghosts, please.
Yeah, don't at us.
Anyway, so the Opera House is said to be the location where the sounds of chains rattling and people screaming emanate from. Legends have it that the Opera House is like a spiritual prison, and souls that end there are trapped there forever. And when I read that, I imagine kind of like American Horror Story house / hotel type deal. And there are reports that after having been in the Opera House to watch the former owner perform, someone heard screams in the distance. And looking up, they saw a ghostly woman reaching her hand out. And as they were leaving, I have chills right now because when I read it, I was freaked out. And now I'm getting freaked out again. As they were leaving, the ghost looked at them, let out a shriek, and then began pounding on an invisible wall like they were trying to get out.
Wow.
And then they disappeared. So I was just like, that is frightening. Ugh. The Amargosa Opera House bought the town of Death Valley Junction on December 10th, 1981. The town was labeled the Death Valley Junction Historic District, so it's actually a National Historic designated place. Fun fact, the local tribe there has constructed a cannabis grow facility in the area. So
nice, good work.
You go, guys. Which is interesting and understandable. If the place is in such disrepair, you might as well do something with the land. You know what I mean? And these days, there are no gas stations, but the hotel and opera house are still open, as well as a small museum. So if you guys want to stay there, you can stay in one of the haunted hotels if you want, in one of the haunted rooms. And other old buildings and train yards still remain in the area. So I'm sure it's a pretty creepy place to walk around if you wanted to.
Hell yeah, it is.
Another supposedly haunted hotel in the area is the Furnace Creek Inn, also having been built by the Borax Mining Company. And the ghost of the chef who worked there between 1959 and 1973 is said to haunt the kitchen.
He either really liked his job.
That's really cute.
He either really liked his job or really hated his job and got trapped there.
He was there for a good amount of time, 14 years? That's a good amount of time.
It is, without a doubt. But still, it's like, do you want to do that for all eternity,
Maybe
man?
he loved food, you know?
Or he loved terrifying people. It's hard to tell.
There's also Scotty's Castle, built in 1922, a vacation home of Walter Scott, who lived there until he passed away in 1954. It's said that he and his dog still haunt the home, which I think is adorable. Footsteps and the disembodied sounds of a dog panting or barking are said to be heard. Some have even felt what feels like a dog brushing up against their legs. And if, God forbid, the dogs pass, I would love to feel Yui, like, rubbing her long body up against us. That'd be so
You'd
cute.
be terrified.
I would be terrified, but that'd be so cool. Scott's ghost has been seen sitting near the fireplace or standing on the grand staircase. Maybe they just loved it so much that they never wanted to leave. I mean, if you were in a fancy mansion, I wouldn't want to leave either, I guess. Visitors are said to experience random bouts of panic attacks or inexplicable despair. So maybe he suffered from depression or something, maybe. Even some itching or tingling until they leave.
Wow.
So maybe
he suffered from crabs as well.
Maybe he just doesn't like trespassers. And he's like, just leave me and my dog alone, thanks. You know?
I imagine, and I know this is just like, could be total nonsense, but the idea of having a ghost pass through you is like, you know, that feeling that you get when your like limb is waking up, like if you like sit on your foot for long enough and it's completely dead, then it starts to tingle like really, really bad, like that, but just lighter, like feeling something pass through you that like gives you the shivers at the same time. I would imagine that is kind of what you feel. No, it's way too effing hot in this office.
Are they multiplying?
No, it's not.
So it's said that the surrounding property is home to some satanic-looking humanoid creature with horns, whatever that means. Scott's friend Bill Keyes has a story published in an issue of the Bullfrog Miner in December of 1907, where he tells a story about when he was prospecting for gold near the town of Rhyolite, which is further up the 95 from Amargosa Valley, so you'd go north. It's just outside of Death Valley National Park. He stopped at a place called Tool Holes to load up on water.
So Tule holes?
Yeah.
It's not like two holes or tool holes?
Tool Holes. To load up on water. And maybe it's Tule holes. No, it sounds better as Tool Holes. But
sounds
I don't
gross
know.
as tool holes.
Anyway, during the night, he heard strange noises in the dark, like a strange moaning of some sort. It's because he's in Tool Holes.
Oh, wow. That's gross.
He also saw strange bobbing orbs of light out in the desert. And you could only see the orbs because it was like pitch dark and you would just see the orbs bobbing, right? And he reported that he woke up and he was 500 feet away from his campsite with marks in the dirt like he had been dragged there.
Holy shit. Now I literally just got cold chills from hearing that. That is terrifying.
Yeah.
I used to sleepwalk. The idea of waking up where you did not fall asleep is terrifying. It used to happen to me all the time as a kid. To imagine you're that far away with drag marks on you, I would lose my mind.
Yeah. No thanks. I'm going to cover other things that I was reading up on. Like, I came across a site that there were so many other things, and I'm going to cover it on a different episode, I think. But this has been Haunted Death Valley.
I think I'm going to do, just because when you talked about it, I was like, oh, I should really cover that, is EVPs. Maybe not next episode, but in the next few episodes, I'm going to cover like what EVP is, which is electronic voice phenomenon. And maybe,
don't play any.
I won't play it for you. That's a lie, I will. But I'll definitely toss a couple into the actual episodes for our listeners to hear. Those are really scary. They're not
really
scary-ish. They're really scary. So I will cover that in the near future, though. But that was really good, Robin.
Thanks.
Good work. I think it was a good episode. So, you know who the credit goes to? The patrons, because they're the ones who pick these topics.
Much.
So good call, patrons.
You guys are awesome. We really couldn't do this without you. So please, if you can, other people, please join us at patreon.com/scarishpodcast and help support the podcast you love to listen to.
Yeah, little as $3 a month. You can do the Choose Your Own Adventure tier where you get early access and you get to tell us what to do. And if you just can't afford that, $1 a month gets you early access to all Scarish content, some exclusive stuff we're also doing as well. Yeah. And it's just a really, really supportive community, and we thank every single one of you. For those of you who want to do a one-time donation, just quick and dirty, and not do it monthly, Robin, how can those folks do that?
You can go to ko-fi.com/scarishpodcasts, and those donations help support us and in upgrading our studio setup. So if you've watched our YouTube videos from the beginning, you'll notice it's improved a lot. It might not be the best right now, but we have definitely improved how we run things and the video quality. And it's all thanks to people like Connor who've donated specific parts that we have needed, or those that have donated to Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast. Please go there and help support us. Make this better.
Absolutely. And if you have a story similar to anything that we've talked about tonight, or a story that's paranormal, all the other things that we listed that you would like to share with us, even if it's something private, you don't want us to share it on the show, you just want to talk to us about it, please reach out to us. The email address is storytimeatscarish.com. You can also go to facebook.com/scarishpodcast, messages there. Tweet at us at scarishpod, Instagram at scarishpodcast, or you can go to the website scarish.com and click on contact us, fill that out, and those come directly to us. Those get read on the Storytime episodes, and we appreciate every single one of them that we get. So very much appreciate all the folks that listen. You make this worth doing. You're such a supportive community. We sincerely love you, and thank you so much for telling us what to do this episode, because I think it turned out really well.
It was really fun.
It was.
I was very surprised by what I found, and I thought it was really cool.
I got really excited doing Atlantis. I was like, this is going to be pretty good, actually. So But I think that's everything that we got for episode 81. So can I take the sign out this time?
Yes, you can.
I haven't done it in a while. So keep on creeping on, and we will see you later this week.